In this inspiring conversation, we meet Michael Sullivan, an emerging influencer and passionate fitness enthusiast. He shares his empowering journey from being an athlete to discovering his love for weightlifting and creating impactful fitness content. Michael reflects on his early influences and the obstacles he faced, including health challenges, all while navigating the fitness landscape to provide valuable educational insights. This dialogue highlights the power of a strong mindset and the critical need for accurate information in the fitness industry. Michael's personal growth shines through as he recounts his ability to overcome setbacks. He also speaks to the profound impact of his faith and the unwavering support of his family during challenging times, such as his battle with retinal detachment. Throughout the conversation, Michael inspires us by emphasizing discipline and motivation as keys to overcoming adversity and discovering purpose in life's struggles. Welcome to the Unbroken Talk, a place to inspire or be inspired by one inspirational story at a time.
Rich Widmer on the Unbroken Talk. Today, I got a young man, which I couldn't wait to interview and get him on the channel. I found him on Instagram, and I dig what he does, and I'll share with you. But this is a gentleman which just inspired me and stopped me in my tracks, because that's what this channel's about. It's about regular people talking, sharing journeys, man, and trying to inspire each other. Changing that platform on the narrative is just, it's a crazy world we live at. So I saw Michael Sullivan right next to me. I saw him on Instagram, and what he does really is, we need so much of this truth. It's basically truth in the health and fitness, individuals wanting to become the best version of themselves. And where do they start, Mike? They start to look on Instagram. They start to look on Facebook and try to tag people that look amazing, right? They're gifted genetically, and they come up with some crazy ass bullshit that people can hurt themselves, and they talk with big words and they make it all kinds of complex and all craziness. And I've been in and around this industry for so long. And when I listen to a young man, Michael just breaks down the best of them in simple terms with logic. It's incredible, Mike. So I saw your following grow, and I expect big things from you, my man. I really do. So with that said, I'm going to pass it to you. And it's not just about the ending story, meaning I read what you did on your intake form. I know the ending is you wanting to be substantial and giving truth and good information on people wanting to be the best version of themselves. But I want to know how Michael Sullivan developed that mind frame, that strong mind on saying, hey, I want to help others the right way. Take me back to where you started, because you talked about school wasn't aligned with you. There was some health conditions or so. Take me back in the beginning when Michael Sullivan was whatever age that is, and tell me the story, man. Talk to me about Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. One, I appreciate you having me here. Those were really kind words at the start. I appreciate that. But yeah, for the most part, I was really just an athlete my whole life. Never really dabbled with weightlifting at all. I kind of felt like it would take away from my ability to perform at the highest level. And I was playing soccer at a pretty high level and played some basketball as well. But that's kind of what took me into college, and again, was just kind of into the sports scene. But towards my third year of college, I started to experiment with the gym, kind of supplementing it as I was playing soccer at the same time. And I immediately fell in love. It was just so much fun. As someone who loves any sort of fitness, it was just a new outlet for me to kind of go crazy.
So that was third. So in college, I just want to freeze you for 1 minute, because this is the key. Now, you described athletics at a high level. So your mind frame is already conditioned by the fact on what dedication, what it takes to be motivated, what it takes to push you when you do not want to get out. People are listening. They don't have that conditioning. And as training people, people that come to you, maybe in their later lives, 30, 40 years old, and they never worked out at all. And all of a sudden they want to turn it on. And that first thing, it's not just doing something, it's here. So take me back on, how did your mind start to condition? When did you get introduced? Because we know I'm the biggest fan. Athletics is the first and foremost the greatest recipe for building that condition of the mind. When did it start with you? How old were you?
Earliest age, real young. So my whole family's been doing it. I have three older.
Mom, dad,
Yep. Yep.
siblings. How many siblings you got?
So I got four siblings.
All right,
Parents were both athletes. My mom played basketball when she
right
was in
on.
high school. She didn't go any further than that. But my dad was a college football player. He played football at Vanderbilt.
There you go.
Yeah, so the athletics run in the family for sure, and all three of my older siblings were big soccer players, so it was just natural for me and my
Right
little.
on. So for you, that conditioning of your mind, and I love that. So you grew up in that wholesome mom and dad, good influence, which it's funny. That's like a rarity now, right? So that's golden now. But in essence, for you, that's fantastic. And it all continued all as we'll pick up the story for high school. But from that early age, as you conditioned your mind, being an athletic performer, was there any struggles that you had up to the high school of, because there's those two paths, man. I mean, athletes could drift. Did you drift in any way, or you were just pin straight focused and you grew into that mind frame?
Yeah, so the funny thing was, I was not as into the athletics as I was later on when I was younger. I think it was kind of just a natural kind of drift towards that since all of my older siblings had done it. It was just what the family did. And so I was athletic, so I didn't. I was performing, I was playing at a high level, but I never really found a lot of pleasure in it. I didn't have the same desire that like my family wanted me to or my siblings wanted me to because they saw I had the talent, but I just didn't want it that bad. So I was doing it, but I really didn't have any desire to do it.
It's interesting because it's that, well, I got to do it, right?
Yeah,
Mom and dad,
exactly.
I got to do it. But
It's in the family, you
yeah,
got to you
yeah.
got to
So
make
I
it.
mean, was there, that you're through school? Were you in the circles of athletics to keep you pin straight, or did you slightly?
So my family, I was raised in a strict household, so I didn't have a ton of room to kind of get out and about. Like any kid, you kind of you have your moments where you sneak about, but for the most part, I was on the straight and narrow. I kind of just like stayed in my own lane. And as a kid, like even into middle school and stuff, I was just kind of hanging out with friends, doing the normal kid stuff. It wasn't until high school where you kind of get exposed to anything. At least for me, obviously that's changed. There's a whole new generation of kids that are getting exposed to things much earlier. Um, yeah, so in high school, that's actually when I started to enjoy sports a lot more. So I actually quit soccer when I was 13 or 14 and I started to play basketball. And it just came really naturally. I think my mom has a lot to do with that, but I always played basketball in my neighborhood, but I had never experimented with playing, in an organized fashion. So I went that route, played that for 2 years while still keeping up with soccer. And then
Mhm.
it kind of made me realize how much I missed soccer, which was like my true, passion and I was able to get back to that. Started playing again at a higher level later in college to the point where I was getting D1 looks. Talked to some different coaches and whatnot throughout that time, but ultimately decided to go to Georgia Tech just to study. And I wanted to put my education first. I didn't see. Since I had built that newfound passion, I didn't really see a lot of merit in having that kind of blunted by the fact that I have to make it my life. So
Yeah.
having a place for it where I can still enjoy it in the capacity that I want it, but not have it take over everything was important for me because I, recently found it again and I didn't want to lose it. Um, so that kind of takes me, where I went to college, just focused on education, still playing soccer and basketball, just not at a super high level, but to the point where I enjoyed it and I kept my skills up.
That dude, I commend you for that. And my question is, I mean, normally it's the opposite where they'll pursue that athletic thinking, well, the money, the marquee, and you could certainly make money playing soccer, not like especially in Europe, but you really took the right path that was right for you. Where did that thought process come? Was it support by mom, dad, siblings, or was that just you being an outlier from the norm?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. I have a really good support system. My family is great, and my parents never wanted to force any of their kids to do something that they didn't see themselves doing indefinitely, or at least like have some sort of passion for. So like while my parents were encouraging of, being involved in sports or just spending your time doing good things to cultivate good habits, they weren't going to force us into any lane. So that was really helpful for me because they were like, hey, if you want to pursue playing soccer in college, you can do that. But if you want to pursue going and getting the best education that you can, then do that. And they were just completely honest with me. They were, hey, it's not the easiest thing to do both. You can get into a good school, but you're gonna have to cut time somewhere. You can do that, but you might want to choose. And that was,
Kudos, man. Mom and
yeah.
dad, kudos to them. That is fantastic. What a great and realistically, I mean, to really build that foundation but still enjoy both. Kudos. What were the studies for school?
So in college, I went in as an industrial engineer. It was kind of
Mm.
just a blanket degree that doesn't really sway one way or the other, just gives me a good overview of a lot of different things. I switched my major to computer science to do some sort of software development, because that's what a lot of the circles that I ran in were kind of pursuing, and that's where the money, the software industry was booming at the time. This was right before COVID hit. And so, yeah, a lot of people were going in that direction. And so that's kind of where I kind of saw myself just because all my friends were doing it. It just, it was a natural next step.
It makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, you were academic oriented. I'm sure and computers, you can't go wrong, obviously. So we continue to path. Now, you mentioned as far as a health situation, is that later on or did we pass over it?
No, the health issues came up during the last handful of years where I have gotten, into my lifting journey. That came up about maybe 2 years or a year and a half into my lifting journey.
How'd that unfold?
Right before I started lifting, I was maybe a year and a half or so out of graduating. And the professional development scene at the school that I was at is very rigorous and it's pushed very heavily. So everyone around me was constantly doing things to try and get the best internships, the best jobs coming out of college. And while I did want to be successful and I wanted to push myself to try and, find the same successes, I just saw a side of the industry that I didn't really like. It was just very cutthroat. It was I don't know, there were a lot of aspects to it that just seemed very superficial, very money.
Michael, I got to tell you, dude, you described every industry. You described everything, my friend, but it's a lot easier when you got a lot of passion for it and it's stepping up. But yeah, go ahead, continue. But I'm like, okay, the computer thing, I find it is
Yeah,
no different.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think just the nature of computer science at the time was very relevant and everyone wanted to hop on, that
Yeah.
bandwagon. Um, so as I saw that, and I kind of noticed that I wasn't enjoying it as much as I had when I
Right.
started, I was kind of considering other options, but I was like, I'll just finish it out and then see where it takes
But
me.
you were really starting to get into lifting at this point.
So that was right before um I had finished out my fall season of soccer, um, the club team at my school. And during that season, I had started to dabble with lifting. Like I said, I was kind of
Mhm.
supplementing, going in a couple times a week with a friend of mine, just like early in the morning, just to see what would happen. I wasn't really putting on much size or strength, but it was kind of just like seeing what I enjoyed. During that time, that's when I kind of was, getting the first few tastes of not really enjoying what I was doing in terms of my degree. And so fast forward to that winter, school had let out and I decided to kind of go the bodybuilding route. I had, started to look into it. It seemed like something that I would enjoy. I was kind of tired of what was going on with the club soccer team. So I
Mhm.
moved on to that and that became everything. I was going in every single day, like never taking a rest, just, all the way full throttle. And I loved it. It was great. It offered me that same release and therapy that sports had my whole life, but I saw it as a more sustainable outlet. Just sports will catch up to you. And, the same way that lifting will, but lifting, you can kind of, extend it a lot longer than you can with.
What year were you?
Yeah, so I was a junior, so I was so this was January of 2022 when I started lifting seriously.
That came to the defining moment on shifting gears. It's interesting, and this is why I do this channel, man, because it's such a unique perspective with a young man now, just rehash and give you kudos. You shared your life's journey in 16 minutes, a strong foundation of your mom and dad, and how athletics was the perfect formation of your mind that started building all those necessary tools to be able to really become the best version of yourself. And as you grow, because as a young man, I'm a big fan of giving yourself exposure as you grow, giving yourself exposure with things, whether it's school or life. So then your personality, your mind gets to settle in and find what you like. Those strong foundations of sports developed such a strong mind for yourself, being able to make the right decision on continue with athletics and sports, satisfying two passions, but still not satisfied. Your whistle was still looking to be wet with something athletic. And I know the feeling of being a fish in water, the introductory of weights. I mean, just embracing it, and how it makes you feel. And you're going to share a little bit about your platform on what you do, but from a chemical standpoint on what your hormones, what gets released in your body, and that's what you embraced to the point where you knew exactly where you want to go with it now, which is absolutely awesome, man. I mean, somebody that has no idea. You think of yourself, 2 years ago, you thought you were on a path and you're on 180. You're like,
Exactly.
it's like, what? And
Right.
it's not yeah, I love it. Dude, kudos to you, man.
Thank you.
Kudos.
Yeah.
So now this is where I really want to hear now. So after junior year, you're lifting. Take us from there. Did you go back for your senior year or what? Take me from there.
Yeah, so that was going into the second semester of my junior year, and I stayed. And that's when I kind of just I realized that the scene was not only something I didn't want to be associated with, but it was something that I was kind of dreading every time I had to be put in that scenario. And the gym was my outlet. The gym was
Mm,
the escape from what I was having to deal with in a
love that.
professional sense or, a school education sense. So I was just heading off to the gym every day. And it was my training the best? No, but it was good enough to make progress, and it was therapy. It was getting me away from the things that I didn't want to involve myself in, and I was like, "How do I make something of this?" Like, there's so much opportunity out there. I don't have to necessarily do what I'm studying, and at the time I said, "Okay, just get your degree and then you can figure it out after. Just get the degree and move on." Because that's what everyone says, is like, you just need a
Mm.
degree. If you have a degree, that's just the golden ticket to getting a job whenever you need it. And so that was my mindset, and I kind of held true to that and continued to study. But around my senior year, because I had started my senior year, I started to drop classes. I just wasn't spending as much time. I couldn't find the motivation to continue. And so my senior year is when I started making content originally for fitness. And I had been really consistent with my training and I built a pretty decent physique. And that's where I made the connection. Like, I don't necessarily have to finish out my degree, because I had seen some traction and some engagement with my social media accounts.
All right, so let me freeze you a little bit because people that, you're going to have all kinds of different audiences that aren't into the fitness arena and there's, not everybody's on the Instagram. So just to back up a little bit, when you started getting into advancing training or so we didn't just jump on to how did you advance yourself to the point where it's, hey man, something's missing out there and I'm the guy that wants to try to fill it, right? That because I found you. There's a true void, right? I mean, I've got a tremendous amount of old school experience and I've got all kinds of different, algorithm pushing shit to me, all the above as you get in it. And you got to soar through so many different crab bushes, trees, and all to get to the cream of the crop where then Michael Sullivan surfaced on. And I see your shit all the time. So where, what, when, and how did you make the decision to, hey, there's a need out there and this is what I want to offer to people? Talk to me
Yeah.
about that. That's what I want to know.
Yeah. So like I was saying, the first year and a half or so was just the normal stuff, as anyone who, has been in the gym for a while will know, is like you're just enjoying it. You lift with your friends, you pick up on things here and there. You're not too focused in on learning about what you're doing. You're like trying to perfect your form, but you're just trying to be consistent, enjoy, try to make gains. It's not about the education around lifting and whatnot. So that was that. And I enjoyed it and it was great. But when I started making content was when I started to also consume content, because I was mostly off social media for most of my life. But a friend of mine kind of convinced me. He was like, hey, if you're interested in doing something professionally with fitness, you might want to consider making content. So when I started doing that, I also started to consume content because I was on these social media platforms. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I started that's when I started taking in the education and the info. And there were always so many conflicting viewpoints. And I would see one side of, this guy who has a great physique talking about how he trains and how he uses method XYZ to get where he got. And then you have this guy over here who's a professional, bodybuilder, Olympia contender. Like he grew his physique doing something completely different. And I was like, well, if there's all these different approaches to
I love
gaining,
this approach,
like
dude.
where do you go? Like I
I
don't, I'm
love
so
this shit.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was completely confused. I was lost. I was like, I guess I'll just kind of follow along and I was just flying by the seat of my pants, just
Yeah.
getting taken wherever the wind blew me. Just like someone said something, I would try it out. And at the time, I didn't really have a good understanding of muscle physiology, which is kind of like where I'll get later on. But so I was kind of just like all over the place, completely lost and confused as to what do I do to make sure that I can grow muscle the most optimally. And like at the time I was completely unfamiliar with, steroid use and like these guys that, have used gear in the past, saying certain things. Like I realize now that they're not on the same playing field as people who are natural, and it's a completely different game that they're playing. But at the time I didn't know that.
Well, this is where, and I'm getting chills because I could see where this is going, man. This is just think of this. The majority of people were like yourself, wanting to get educated. And the easy back in my day, it was subscribe to a magazine. All right. I'm going to date myself, right? It's a magazine or it's going into the gym, talking around the circles and all the above. Here, it's boom, instantaneously. And you're learning, you have no idea that, do this, that, and the other thing. So that's specifically where you were trying to get your information and you were seeing everybody contradicting themselves.
Because that's where you go
Right.
now.
Yeah.
And when you're looking for information, you go to Instagram, you go to YouTube, you go to
Yeah.
wherever the content is, because it's the easiest to consume. People don't want to pick the book anymore. So it's very easy to just go to the internet. And that's where a majority of the content is. And with short form content, you can consume so much of it in such a short span of time. You can get a lot more info, but it doesn't really help you if all of the info you're receiving is completely different from a million different perspectives. And so it was just very disorienting.
When did you first jump on Instagram to start your content?
I want to say spring of 2023.
Oh, 23. So you were doing, like everybody else, I would say, the beginning, showing workouts, whatever it may be. So as it unfolded, when did you start to see there's something else that's needed? When did that
So
unfold?
it took a little while. It took I would say a solid 6 months or so of me, making content, consuming content, figuring things out for myself. Because when I started making content, I received a good amount of engagement pretty quickly. So it only
Hmm.
took a few months for me. I had a video go relatively viral. And at the time, the content I was making was just simple gym vlogs. I would just mic myself up and talk through my workouts. And that was it. So a lot of my focus was into that, making content, and then trying to learn things, pick up on things here and there. But it took me a solid 6, 7 months after that, after I started making content, to kind of start connecting dots and be like, okay, what makes more sense? And this is when I started finding people who made content who more aligned with what I was looking for. People like Ryan Jewers or TNF, these types of creators who were getting a lot of notoriety at the time. So that kind of took me into this new niche of lifting where it was kind of optimal. You've heard the science-based lifting or optimal lifting, which I'm not the biggest fan of those phrases. It's kind of just a blanket statement at this point, or a blanket term. But so that's where I kind of got into that, and I started doing more research into why they said the things that they did. Because most people, when they go to look for information on how to train, they see a physique and they take the knowledge they get from that physique and apply it to themselves, thinking that they'll get the same results. But that's just not the case. It just shows a lack of understanding of genetics and how important that is in the sport, and the difference between people's makeup physically, biologically, um or physiologically. And that was frustrating, because I started that became more apparent. But at the same time, I couldn't fault a lot of the people, because people get put in the situation where they get popular from showing their physique, and then they kind of get into a mind frame where they're like, okay, well, now that I have all these people following me, I need to offer some sort of value, some sort of educational value to show how I got to this point. So they just put out what they've been doing, whether it's bad or not, and people are going to eat that up. But the thing is, they're genetic freaks. That's why they're popular. They got these insanely nice, aesthetics from
Mm-hmm.
doing whatever. And it's not
Right.
going to apply to you. From to the average
Right.
person, the person that's just trying to put on some muscle, it's not going to apply to you. So
Which
it
is the masses.
exactly.
Which is the
Exactly.
masses.
Yeah, and so you have this huge output of bad information from these people who, I would say the majority of them don't really know that it's misleading, to kind of just say, okay, do this because, I got these results by doing that. It's like, well, you look like that because, you
Yeah.
have those genetics. You're inclined to, have more round muscle bellies or whatever it is. And people don't understand that. So a large majority of people, the people putting out the content and the people consuming it, don't understand these integral factors that go into, like, how do you build muscle? How do you look this good?
You saw an opportunity. This is an opportunity started to
Yes. Yeah,
identify itself. So take me
exactly.
from there. So when did you make that decision
Yeah.
to
So
start?
the funny thing was, I kind of had a bit of that. I didn't feel prepared at the time to start putting out content, educational content.
Mhm.
I was kind of just consuming it and trying to dial my training in. So for the next year or so, it was, and this is, sorry, to go back briefly, this is when I dropped out of school. Um, in when I started figuring out kind of like how to train a little bit better, and I wanted to focus more on that. This is when the first health issue kind of hit me, where I had some serious gut problems, and I lost 15 to 20 pounds in about a
Uh,
month, and I was completely out of the gym. And that gave me a lot of time to reflect on what I was doing, why I needed to continue at school, what the other options were. And so that's when I
was that
dropped out.
was that a genetic thing or something got sick or
Still not sure exactly. Still
yeah.
not sure. I got the help that I needed, and
Okay.
it's been fixed since
You're
then.
better.
I'll still
You're
have, but yeah, it's much much better. And I cleaned up my diet, and I have a certain approach to nutrition that definitely helps with my gut health.
that was a wake-up call.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely needed it because being in college, most people are going to eat pretty poorly, and
Yeah. 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 Understood.
so yeah, that hit me pretty hard, and I lost some progress there, but at the same time, it gave me motivation to kind of seek out what I was looking to do professionally.
How long did that take you out of commission?
So all of October and probably half of November. So about a month.
So that must have been from a mental standpoint, really a knife in the back. I'm
Yeah,
making this progress, loving it, and then getting hurt,
exactly. Because
figuratively
it was right
speaking.
when I started to understand how to train better too. And I was like,
Yeah.
these concepts are starting to make more sense. Like, okay, my body's growing because I'm doing this, not just I'm following, Chris Bumstead's training program and that's why I'm getting big.
Right.
So it was starting to make sense. And so, yeah, it was a setback and it was tough. But at the same time, it gave me the opportunity to kind of reflect on what I was doing and gave me that chance to make
So
the
you
decision.
shifted from that, and this is where I love that strong mind, shifted gears to use that time accordingly. That's
Absolutely.
what you did, and you educated yourself.
In
That's
ways.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. So then that's where you build. Was it? Did you take any additional like class or educate you more from a uh, health wise to take your Instagram content into another level?
So surprisingly, no. So this is when I started to kind of see what different outlets I could take with fitness. And the first thing that was pushed to me kind of from my parents, it was just an idea of theirs was to go the chiropractic route and to look at some sort of education there. But I just come out of being in the system, the school system for however many years, and I didn't want to go back immediately. I just wanted to take the time to kind of figure out the next steps. So I had also stopped making content back in the summer. And then that's when the health issues kind of started, but they were off and on. And then they kind of came to a head in October and November. I started making content again in February of 2024. And I decided to make YouTube style content. So they were longer vlogs rather than short form vlogs. And this is where I started to implement more of the training styles that I had grown accustomed to through, from the last handful of months where I was learning to train a little bit better. But again, I hadn't really received any serious education as to, how these mechanisms were working. And so that's kind of what I stuck to. And I made some friends at the gym and I just made content and the content started to do well again. So this is kind of my second era of content. And I was just enjoying that, slowly, gradually learning about different things. Through the people that I was following is when I started to hear more about muscle physiology, just kind of learning foundational concepts in muscle physiology and biomechanics. So I started to dabble a little bit, but it didn't interest me too much. The people that I was with were kind of just like, let's just go lift. Like you lift heavy
Right.
shit. That's it. So
Right.
that was the name of the game. And I was, applying some of the things that I had learned, but I was just enjoying it and it was good to be healthy. And so that was most of that first half of 2024. And going into the summer, I was still doing the same thing. It was the most consistent I had been with content. I was making really good progress in the gym. And then while I was at the beach with my family, my retina randomly detached in my right eye.
Dude. Oh,
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah. And that caught me completely off guard because I had never really had any vision issues. I just kind of noticed something was wrong with my eye when I was at the beach. And I got back and told my dad about it. And he was like, okay, we should get that checked out. And it's kind of a funny story because my dad's a physician and I told him about this. And he said that his initial thoughts were either that one, I had a retinal detachment, or that two, I was having a stroke. And he didn't say anything.
Goodness.
He just like, we just need to get this checked out. So went into an optometrist the next day. This was at like 9 a.m. and by noon I was getting surgery for my retina.
Cause just
So that's the thing with retinal detachments is it's hard to tell.
yeah.
It's usually always some sort of physical trauma to the head
Yeah,
or
trauma something, right?
so because of how mine healed, and because of kind of what they saw when, taking a look at it initially, they think that it was a trauma from a while back, possibly even like 8 to 10 years ago.
No kidding.
So it could have been something through sports. There was some times where I got hit in the eye when playing basketball. Someone like would, elbow me
Elbow or something. Yeah.
or
Wow.
the repetitive heading of the ball through soccer. So there were a few kind of theories that we had, but it was never confirmed. It was kind of just like it could have been anything really. So yeah, I had my surgery and then I unfortunately the surgery didn't take the first time. It didn't work out how it was supposed to. So I had to get a second surgery about a week and a half to 2 weeks later.
Was it affecting your vision?
Oh yeah, so I couldn't really use my right eye at
Right.
all. It was with when the retina detached, I basically lost like half the vision in my eye. It was kind of just blurry
Yeah.
on the top half.
Yeah.
And then after the surgery, I couldn't use it. It was covered up for a few days, and then after that, the vision was so bad and my eye was so irritated that I just kept it shut. For about 3 to 4 months after the surgery, I just kept my eye shut. I was just walking around like this.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it was not a fun process. And the thing was, going into the first surgery, it caught me so off guard and I had no time to process it. So it wasn't that difficult mentally. It was kind of just like 9 a.m. I found out, and then noon I was in for surgery, and I was like, okay, well, it is what it is. I'll just move on with it. And then the surgery was done, and that was it. And then I found out I had to get a second surgery, and I was like, okay, well, this sucks.
Yeah, now you get the time to think about it.
Exactly. I had time to just like wallow in my self pity and whatnot, and it was definitely tough mentally. One of the more difficult moments I've had to experience.
Yeah, because you were just starting to settle in yourself. Are
Yeah.
you, Michael, is your family religious?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I mean, if obviously as being very religious and a brother in Christ, that is a point where I'm sure you're leaning on your Lord
Yeah.
and Savior, right? Wanting to, yeah, so the second surgery took, or
Yes, the second surgery was successful. But yeah, to your point, it's very helpful to not only have like a good family support system, but also to have faith. And, that plays a huge role in our family. So obviously having that is always going to be better than not. So, but yeah, so it was successful, which was good. The recovery process is pretty extensive, and I was already pretty frustrated with things. I thought I was just going to have the first surgery, kind of be out for a little while and then get back to it. I had no idea what my vision was going to look like afterwards, which was already scary. Like my left eye has good vision, but my right eye just having great vision in it anymore. It's a difficult thing to kind of come to terms with, because one day you have great vision in both your eyes and then the next day you only have one eye left. And
so how long was the recovery?
so it's a long recovery process, especially
Yeah.
since the detachment was further back. There's more like the fluid that fills in that space when the retina tears has time to kind of sit and thicken. So that's what I'm in the process of kind of clearing that out right now. So it's a long process where the fluid just very gradually drains out of the eye, or out of that pocket, I guess. But the vision's not great. It's I kind of describe it as looking through a dirty piece of glass. I have a
Okay.
contact now so that I can, get some of the vision back, but the vision's much darker in that eye. There's just some issues with it, but the best thing was I was able to get a lot of my depth perception back when I got the contact. Before, the vision was just terrible. I mean, it was completely nearsighted. I could barely see, 2, 3 inches in front of my face. But the biggest scare, I guess, in that whole process wasn't for me. It wasn't like, oh, I mean, I might not have my good vision in that eye anymore. It was like, am I going to be able to lift heavy again? Like, I don't want to.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
Yeah,
part of you. It's who you are at this point.
yeah,
It's a super scary thing. This is a situation where, you know, at your age, you're starting to settle in the direction that you want to go towards, to have something like that. And that's not a sneeze in the park. That's something serious. How much
yeah.
did you lean on your faith to get through? I'm sure it
Yeah.
was difficult, Michael.
It was difficult for sure. And I leaned on my faith constantly. I don't think there's any way to really get through anything difficult if you are just completely reliant on yourself. I think just having the acceptance of something greater than yourself is hugely necessary to understanding life, and just having that foundation, because I grew up with it, was super important and kept me both mentally and spiritually grounded through that process. And so having that and having my family constantly around was great. And my dad was helpful. He's not super familiar with issues with the eyes. He's an anesthesiologist, so he doesn't really have the same level of understanding of what's going on. The ophthalmologist kind of reaffirmed that I would be okay to lift again as heavy as I wanted, and that the changes in pressure,
Yeah,
that
that's
are
what I was going to mention. That's concerning.
it was concerning, and my
Yeah,
parents were pretty worried about it, especially my mom. She was like, "You don't want to just like go back to lifting and
yeah.
have."
You don't want to be holding your breath under tension, man. Yeah, no, that we said he gave you the green light, but I'll tell you, I got to freeze you on what you said. Is just, it's worth me repeating. Meaning, at times of tragedy or times of obscurity where you're facing a speed bump, however big it is, you cannot just rely on yourself. The bigger power, Michael. That is just so. that's not said enough, and that's so under believed. It's just amazing. And speaking, as a 59-year-old having my own bumps and bruises without, that higher power. Oh, good Lord. There's two paths to go down. You're either going to where you remain unbroken, or you're going to pharmaceuticals, or you're going to alcohol, or you're going to depression, or you're like one not wanting to be above ground anymore. So that's fantastic. So that strength kept feeding, your to be able to push forward. I commend you on that in every which way, I possibly can. So at what point did you start to feel comfortable to get back in to feeling remotely normal again? At least, right?
It was a process. It was a process for sure, and it was just every day felt really slow, just waiting to be able to get active again, because the issue was the first 2 to 3 weeks after surgery, it's not just like I can't go to the gym, it's you are bedridden. You can't really move all that much. She doesn't the ophthalmologist, the surgeon doesn't want you moving around, walking around. She doesn't want you lifting heavy things and whatnot, or light things. She doesn't want you lifting anything. And so I was kind of just in a period where I was a vegetable. I was unable to do anything.
That'd be tough, dude.
It was difficult. As someone who has just been active his whole life, just laying in bed and not doing anything was very, very tough. But this is kind of where I started to increase my knowledge of the gym, because I started to look into, this is like the first steps in me taking this route towards an education of, understanding these concepts. But I started looking into how I could get my gains back as quickly as possible once I got back into the gym. And that kind of led me to a few different pages that discussed, these concepts and the concepts of fatigue and how that relates to muscle growth. It's where I came across Chris Beardsley, his just very extensive knowledge of these topics.
Mhm.
And that's where I started to grow in my understanding of muscle physiology and biomechanics. And so I just had all this time just sitting in my bed, sitting at, my desk or whatever it was. And I spent almost all of it just researching and trying to get take in as much knowledge as I could of these concepts and of these subjects that I could have gone to school for if I had chosen a different route. But now that I'm here, it's like, okay, well, this is what I'm passionate about, and I've had a huge setback. How do I make the most of this situation?
That I'm gonna freeze you. Setback. Yeah, it was a physical setback. But your faith, man, if if you did not have now, assuming prognosis is long and hard, but good, promising, right? Okay, so if you did not have this setback, what you experienced and what you just described is exactly what was needed, because that's why I reached out to you for that sole purpose on what you're developing. You're on to something, and I'll share more in depth what I see from my standpoint, but you're on to an element that is truly needed by the general population, which is in the masses. And not to get off topic, but to circle back, this wasn't a setback. This was your time to grow your passion here. Strengthen you. Your mind was conditioned. He did not give you anything that you couldn't handle. Yeah, it sucked and all, but no, you didn't slip into pharmaceuticals or any of the above. You used the time wisely and became to really develop what's needed to be able to unleash what you're going to share. So you embraced all that knowledge. When did you start unleashing it?
So it took a little while to recover, obviously, and I was out of the gym for a while. To your point, sorry, I wanted to touch on that, is this aspect of kind of using the most of your time and growing out of these hardships and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think anytime you experience some sort of resistance in your life or some sort of setbacks, it's necessary to be disciplined in those moments. And people always talk about the difference between discipline and motivation. And I'm a huge proponent of needing both, especially from a lifting perspective. Motivation is hugely important for being able to output the most you can in the gym. But discipline is also the underlying kind of foundation there. And when you do get hit with these rough patches, it's the discipline that's going to help you stay in that.
Yeah. I
No,
love listening to this shit.
yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said there. You know, people, like you said, people will turn to different things when the going gets tough, I guess. And you know, the grass can always be greener. You want to improve the things around you, but people kind of forget that the best place to start improving is yourself. And you know, having the
Well
wherewithal
said.
mentally to kind of make the changes for yourself can improve the things around you. And so, looking for a different partner, turning to drugs or whatever it might be, like these aren't usually the solutions to our problems. The solutions are typically not right in front of us, but inside us, and we just have to bring those things to light. And having setbacks, having the discipline to kind of sit with yourself, sit in prayer, and whatever it might be, gives you the opportunity to kind of become a better version of yourself and level up. And that's what I wanted to do. You know, you find a lot of motivation from discipline a lot of times, and you know, I was disciplined enough to want to continue my journey with fitness and with lifting, even though I had a setback. And, you know, that motivated me to want to learn everything that I could to improve on what I had already developed in my fitness journey. And so it was a process to get back to, you know, the main point here. It was a process of recovering, and it took me a solid 3 months or so to get back to lifting. And it was around October when I was fully back to training with full intensity. And around then was when I'd started making some content before, kind of just general mindset things, speaking my mind after, you know, recovering and just kind of putting my thoughts out there. And then I was also simultaneously making some videos expressing my new knowledge of what I had learned. And what kind of kicked off my third phase of content creation was when I reacted to a video of Dr. Mike Israetel's, who's a very big name in the fitness
Mhm.
industry for promoting certain science-based concepts. And I kind of just I was a bit snarky, a bit sarcastic, and like in real life, I'm a very pleasant dude. I really don't care too deeply about social media. It's all very superficial, and like I
Mhm.
care about that matter. But on social media, if you want to, you know, kind of put your name out there, you sometimes you got to push some buttons. And so I was a little bit, you know, sarcastic, like I said, but I kind of just, you know, made the opposite points, kind of getting people to ask questions about, you know, why are you just listening to this guy simply because he has a PhD when what he's saying is fundamentally wrong, and here are the examples. And that video, and a few videos that I made similar to it were what kind of kicked off that whole genre of content that I started making. And that's when I realized that there was a niche here that I could fill, where there's so much terrible content and so many people are lost, especially the new lifters. The people that are trying to get into fitness are completely misled by the majority of what the fitness industry has to offer. And I can take the time to instruct by offering some sort of entertaining videos that might be a little sarcastic, they might be a little snooty, whatever you want to say, and it might make you laugh, whatever it is. But I wanted to offer some sort of value to get people to start asking why, and to get the people who are actually looking to benefit from sort of content online, some sort of training principle or methodology that they're looking to apply to themselves, and be able to develop like good principles at a foundational level. And so that just led me to the point where I'm at now, where I've been making content like that for a while. And the main thing I preach is just understand muscle physiology and biomechanics at a foundational level. It doesn't take a ton of time, but if you're willing to put in that amount of time to get that basic understanding, you can improve your training tenfold, and you don't have to listen to all the BS that's being constantly.
I loved it.
I appreciate it. That's kind of my goal, is like,
Good for
you
you.
don't be too of like a salesman in your content. You want to be personable. You just kind of put your personality out there, and you let people decide for themselves whether they like you. And you know, just being a normal guy that people can relate to is definitely a bonus. It definitely helps, because you know, if the more relatable you are, the easier it's going to be to kind of get people to understand where you're coming from. And like you said, there's just so many barriers when it comes to fitness and putting out fitness content, whether that's gear or just kind of the genetic component. It can be difficult. So you have to play to your strengths. And like you said, like these old school concepts and whatnot, there's a whole what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry. There's just a lot of people that will look only to what they've received from these bodybuilders who have been on gear their whole lives. And like I said, you can't really fault them. And I mentioned this earlier, is like they will go to what is attractive to them. And a lot of that, especially in bodybuilding, is how you look. It's just the nature of the game. And so when there's a market for it, the people with the best looks are going to provide. And unfortunately, it's not the best. And you have to be able to sift through that. And once people use their brains a little bit and they decide to kind of educate themselves and understand these basic concepts, just simply understanding the role of gear and how big of an impact it has on things is hugely important to kind of leveling the playing field when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to fitness education. But you kind of just got to chip away at it. And that's what I'm doing, is just every day chip away at it.
Amen to that, man. I kudos to you, and keep this in mind. And you're absolutely right. It's the shiny quarter gets found at the bottom of the pool, but when they pick it up and they take it home and it tarnishes instantly and it doesn't last, it's so long. But when you're giving them truth and you're inspiring them the way you are, making it simple, and then they put that into active and they see the results, that's where it'll be everlasting, because truth doesn't lie, right? It's the bullshit, that they look great, they look this, they look that, but it's lights, camera, action, and all the above. So keep it out of it. I'm proud of you, brother. I mean, the first time meeting you, and what a great story. I have two last questions for you, and then we'll
Absolutely.
jump off. So this one, it's, if you had to go back in time and whisper something into Michael Sullivan's ear at an early on, what kind of advice would you give yourself, knowing where you are right now? What would you tell yourself?
I would definitely go back to high school, and I would kind of just urge myself to ask questions professionally early on and not just kind of take the path that is easy. And and this is no hate to or shade to any of the older generation, because you're part of my parents' generation, and the pushing of college and education is a huge, it's important to that generation. But there's so much that is offered outside of that, whether it's entrepreneurship or going to trade school, or whatever it might be. Just kind of finding your niche early on is really important. And just going to school right out of college, oftentimes it can be very difficult to kind of understand your place and what you're trying to do with it. And there's a lot of value in taking your time, not committing to something directly out of high school, and figuring out what you really want to be doing. Because if I had that mindset going into or leaving college or leaving high school, I would have asked a lot more questions. I would have tried to figure out what my passions were, and where I could, you know, find what made me happy in a professional sense. And obviously the things that happened the way, that they did throughout my life have brought me to where I am. And if I would have found fitness the same way, who can say? But, ideally, if I was to find fitness earlier on, maybe I would just, I guess the whispering would just be like, pick up a dumbbell or something.
Hey, great advice, man. All I'm going to say is that is great advice, but you're going to give great advice to your own kids. You're going to cut the corner to them. Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. And I agree with that. As far as in today's world, college isn't always the answer. It was when I was growing up, of course. The last question is, and I know the intake, because it's new, you're new to the channel, but now that you heard, you know what it's about. This symbol, the symbol is the heart, the heart's mind, body, soul. The EKG is life, man. It's how it goes up and down. And the weights are, Mike, how heavy has your life been at some point? Pretty damn heavy, man. Some of the bumps and bruises, that's what it's about. And the word unbroken is self-explanatory. The symbol at this point, do you see it representing anything for yourself on your journey on what you shared?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think anyone who's been through tough times and has come out the other side can relate to the message of the show and of that symbol. And it can be moving forward. It can be a huge, point of motivation. And like I said, I'm a big proponent of motivation. I think you need both motivation and discipline, but there's amazing things that you can get from hearing these kinds of stories, seeing how they relate to your life. And yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of what you've talked about and how you've described what you're trying to do with this show. It means a lot. And I think it's a great.
I appreciate it, brother. Dude, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you, man. And I got to tell you, it never ceased to amaze me. The stories that come out of people, I have no idea. I just jaw drop and just the positive, inspirational endings you have. So kudos to you and so much success. I'm going to be watching you. I
Yeah,
can't wait. But thanks again for coming on, brother.
absolutely. Thank you for having me again. This was
You're
great.
welcome.